Okay, so this week's quiz, I think is closed, and of course, quiz 4, I posted a discussion of that last week. Article 13 of the Quiaile, Texas Constitution focused on the future of slavery in Texas, and there's quite a bit of argument about that. Number two, Tejano leaders were very supportive of the introduction of slavery because they thought the economic future of Texas depended on the cultivation of cotton. And of course, the cultivation of cotton means slave labor, which means that Tejano leaders were open to the introduction of slavery and very supportive of it, actually, not just open in Texas. Slavery equal cotton, cotton equals slavery. What's the importance of the Viscaya brothers in San Antonio? They were in Saltillo. They were a member of the legislature there. They were actually not in Texas. They were from Saltillo, but they were a member of the Quiaile Tejas legislature, and they worked with Stephen F. Austin to introduce cotton and slavery into Texas because although they're not in Texas, they felt like they could maybe get a cut off the cotton dollar if Texas started to become wealthy. So they were pro-slavery members of the legislature in Saltillo. What's the following statement best applies to Texas history beginning in the 1820s, moving Mississippi to Texas, this tidal wave that crashes into Texas from the east, from Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and I guess from the north from Arkansas. But it was a cotton growing state, but the big ones were Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. And they're growing at an incredible rate. They supply most of the world's cotton, and they're just next door to a depopulated Texas. And so what you have is this tidal wave of a slave economy that crashes across the Sabine River, which is not much of a barrier. And ultimately, Texas will become part of that slave economy too. So moving Mississippi to Texas. So the shift from Spanish Texas, a ranching industry mostly, into Anglo-dominated Texas with slave captives being treated horribly, growing cotton. And it's very evil, very evil. There's so much human pain and suffering, but the truth is that profits were being made, which is, I'm not justifying it because it was made literally on the sweat and the labor of folks that were captive and being whipped. The women were being raped. There was family separation. So the economy of Texas, the growth of the cotton economy of Texas was built upon this intense human suffering and exploitation. People don't want to deal with that, but it's just a fact. Which of the following was not a provision of the law of April 6, 1830? And that's the creation of the Mexican state of Quiaile, Tejas. And I know I mispronounced Quiaile, by the way. I apologize to you Spanish speakers and folks from Mexico. I don't know. Anyway, what can I do? I could do better. I try, but somehow I fall short. Everything else was part of that law that's on the screen there. Number 6, working closely with the members of the Tejano elites. How was the anti-Texas, anti-slave laws in Texas undermined? And it was the scam, the Apprentice Scam, where slaves that had no idea what they were signing, they had no choice but to sign. They come into Texas basically as apprentices. They're going to get paid, I can't remember the exact amount, very little money every year, not enough to pay for their freedom. They're going to be apprentices for 60 years. Basically, they come into Texas as apprentices, but the way to think about it, it's slavery by another name, because the way the game was set up, the slaves that came into Texas as apprentices would never, ever get out of their position, and the same kind of punishment applied to them. And the same was true of their children, by the way. So it was a very diabolical plot, and for a couple of years it worked. Number 7, which of the following factors best explains, well, obviously it's cotton. Texas becomes part of the cotton economy, and pretty soon it's going to be part of the U.S. cotton economy. And there is a boom in the production of cotton. which is highly desirable at this time. It is the most desired commodity on earth at this time. Okay, number 8, what happened in 1827? It was this Fredonian Rebellion, which I know sounds really stupid, and it's one of these details and blah, blah. But the big thing is that it was led by this nut named Hayden Edwards near Nacogdoches. The importance of the Fredonian Rebellion was, one, that Austin opposed it, but two, that's what got Texas on the radar screen of Mexico City. That's when Mexico City is always super sensitive to the border. This was true in the Spanish period. This is true in the Mexican period, and for good reason. And so when you have this dumb little rebellion that's pretty easily dispersed, folks in Mexico City start to say, okay, what's going on up there? We better start paying attention. So it's kind of, you might think of it as the first domino that falls in the sense of the Mexicans trying to regain their authority in Texas and Texans resisting Anglo-Texans and Tejanos. Number 9, the law of 1830 was passed after the Fredonian Rebellion and after the Tehran inspection of Texas. It's designed to try to shut the barn door on Anglo immigration, the immigration of slaves. It's too little, too late. It's not well enforced because the Mexicans don't have a very strong police presence here at all. So it's a kind of a lame attempt on the part of the Mexican government to regain control over their Northeast. But it does infuriate Anglos, and it helps build those tensions between Anglos, Tejanos, Federalists, and the Centralists in Mexico City. Let's see. Number 10, Vincente Guerrero was the president of Mexico. He was of African descent, and if he lived in the United States, he'd be considered African American. It just goes to show you that race relations in Mexico, although not perfect, were very different than they were in the U.S. Anyway, he's the one that decreed slavery over in 1829. Folks in Texas freak out. It doesn't necessarily apply to Texas, but here's the big picture. The Mexican central government now is starting to assert, or trying to assert, its control over Texas. It had let Saltillo kind of run the show, but Saltillo, from the point of view of Mexico City, had not been strong enough. And so the Mexican central government's trying to come in, reestablish the control of Mexico in Texas. But like I say, it's a little too late. Although the slave emancipation decree didn't really take effect in Texas. Okay, Mayer Tehran, he was sent to Texas to inspect conditions and determine the extent of Anglo-American influence there. He's shocked by what he sees. He reports to Mexico City, oh my God, we're about to lose Texas. He sees very clearly what's going to happen. And ultimately, he ends up in a small town just south of the Rio Grande, and he kills himself. It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear to him that Texas is going to be lost to Mexico. And we think no one really knows why anyone kills himself, I guess. Such a tragic thing. But there is some evidence that he was in such despair over what would happen to Texas, what he saw, that it led him to commit suicide. 12, when we last left Stephen F. Austin, he'd been arrested in Saltillo and thrown in jail for what? Recommending that Texas on its own declared that it was an independent state from Coahuila within the Mexican nation, and do this without the approval of the Mexican government. So this is really important. Austin is not arguing that Texas declare its independence from Mexico. Austin's arguing that Texas should declare its independence from Coahuila, and but stay within the Mexican nation. This was the thing for Austin. He wanted Texas to succeed, but as a slave state in the Mexican nation. Okay, I think I've done this now, and I'm going to stop the share. And